God comes out of nowhere and physically wrestles with Jacob, trying to see if Jacob is worthy to continue carrying the promise of God's chosen people. God chooses to answer Jacob's earlier prayer in a profound way by physically waylaying Jacob and showing him that he is worthy to encounter Esau successfully. God shows that he is concerned for more than just the faith of Jacob. He wants to physically see if Jacob is worthy of the covenant. If you are an artist, the verse to paint in this passage is verse 31. Jacob has his son rising upon him as he passes the place where he wrestled with God the previous night, calling it Peniel, which means the face of God. Jacob has a limp, but he is not beaten down or defeated. Instead, he is amazed that he has come away from an encounter with God with only an injured hip. This is so profound that Jews would later remember Jacob's amazing encounter with God every time they stayed away from the thigh muscle on the hip socket. Anytime they ate, they would remember how God is not a safe God, but God is much more. They would also remember that God is good because of the fact that he remembered his promise to Jacob and how he answered the prayer of Jacob with a new name and a blessing. The new name and blessing, though, comes with a price, and Jacob comes away from his encounter with God permanently maimed. God is an unsafe God. In Mark 10, James and John asked Jesus if he would grant that they would be seated at his right and left hand. They believe their simple asking of this favor is enough for Jesus to grant it to them. Jesus shows them that such a desire comes at a price. They must be willing to drink from the same cup of suffering that Jesus drinks from. The disciples want thrones, but Jesus shows them that they must limp instead. In the same way, Jacob asked for a blessing from the mysterious man who wrestled with him. This only comes after Jacob had struggled for hours with a man and forced the draw. Jacob came away with a blessing, but he also came away with an injury that would certainly plague him for the rest of his life. What does Jacob's limp have to tell us today? We are called to newness by Paul, but we may come to this newness with a limp because throwing off the old self is hard. This story also communicates that we should not have a lollipop faith in God, in which things are always sunny and good. Our relationship with God should not be passive or subservient, but should recognize that God desires us to wrestle with him in some ways. The elect do not sit idly back, but must strive to follow God just as God strives on our behalf. Our God is not a safe God, but he is a good God because he remembers his promises and is faithful to keep them.